Buckle up, people, because by the end of today's video, we may have uncovered one of the key components, not just for Final Fantasy XIV's next expansion, Evercold, but for the whole Godless Realms saga. We're getting into the weeds, we're going back to ancient Greece. Aristotle is in the building, people. You see, yesterday I was reacting to one of you guys' theories for Final Fantasy XIV, and halfway through I realized it needed a video all of its own. So today we're going to get nerdy with it. Hello, everybody. It's your boy Jmulls, and I hope you studied up on your triangles. And you know I have to bring up Xenoblade. We have at Matt P994 who says, in terms of the moral quandary, Halmarud pitches her claims to our emotions. Saving someone is better than losing everyone. The emotional quality of something is termed pathos. Calyx is purely logical. It makes no sense to lose everyone. The only logical conclusion is to preserve ourselves in some way. Logic equals logos. Did somebody mention logos though? But us? We can't let anyone die if it can be helped. We must save as many as possible, unless they grief me in a dungeon. Any life lost is a tragedy, unless they play machinist. That's the most ethical stance. Ethos, pathos, logos. Neither of these are necessarily wrong, except in comparison to each other. Similar to how the culmination of the Ascian arc resulted in us acknowledging that we and Emmett had justifiable reasons for our stances that just happened to be incompatible. I think this too will culminate in a three-way standoff between us, Halmarud, and Calyx. The latter's only on Halmarud's side for the time being because it is the most logical choice. But circumstances will ultimately change that. Likely after he finds a way to transfer into a different form and gain power over her in some way. Buckle up, people, there's a lot to talk about here. Now, I definitely agree this is almost definitely going to be a central theme, or at least plot device they're going to use in the future. Now, for those who don't know, there was some old boomer way back in the day called Aristotle, and he had a borderline sexual fascination with the triangle, so he came up with the rhetorical triangle. Basically, there are three key areas that you can convince an audience of your position. Logos, ethos, pathos. Logos appeals to reason, ethos appeals to the writer's character, and pathos appeals to the emotions and the sympathetic imagination, as they word it here. And I think this little paragraph here, or more like here, could play a rather large role as well. The rhetorical triangle is typically represented by an equilateral triangle, suggesting that logos, ethos, and pathos should be balanced within a text. However, which aspects of the rhetorical triangle you favor in your writing depends on both the audience and the purpose of that writing. Yet if you're in doubt, seek a balance among all three elements. Now, while I agree that's going to be a central pillar for the story going forward, I disagree with this sentiment here. I'm not convinced that Halmarud is pathos, and I'm not convinced Calyx is logos. What do I mean by this? I think of the two characters so far, Halmarud and Calyx, Halmarud's the one that has shown the most allegiance to pure logic. Now, I know Calyx gives himself off as that type of character because he is the scientist nerdy boy, right? But let's look back in a couple of scenes here. Let's go back specifically to the end of patch 7.3, because this is the best example of Calyx essentially breaking character that we've had so far. Now, just as an asterisk for everything we're going to be talking about for the remainder of this section, we need more data. We've only had a couple of scenes for these characters, and it's not necessarily enough to go on, but I think it can give us an indication of where we're going to go. So at the end of patch 7.3, or at least near the end before all the wrap up, the Warrior of Light's going in for the slam dunk, and Calyx starts to break character here. He realizes his plans are falling apart around him, and his emotions start to really come through here. If we're working off the idea of pathos, ethos, and logos, and that this is going to be a central pillar of the story moving forward, the character that has shown the most emotion of the three so far, besides like the Warrior of Light going, it is Calyx. This isn't the only example though. Let's go a little bit later into patch 7.3, specifically the meanwhile scene, when Calyx manages to get away and he's now by himself for a bit. He sweats profusely. They really show that off. He has essentially a PTSD vision of us. As he should, by the way. He goes to grab his heart, or what's left of it.
This is absurd. I have neither heart nor lungs. I was overconfident.
I was overconfident. The prudent course, the logical course, would have been to wait it out, basically.
A rash decision.
Specifically until he had calculated an insurmountable advantage. He didn't act according to logos. They could play on that. But again, Look at the wording here that they use. He's admitting he didn't follow the most logical course of action here, a rash decision. One perhaps influenced by the others and their developments. He acted emotionally.
But no matter, learn from this
And then right here, he says, but no matter, learn from this setback and next time. This is how Logos, or a logical approach to the situation, would react to failure here. Learn from it, do better next time, because that's the logical course of action.
And next time.
However, look at him here. He becomes overly emotional. They take over him.
How much time and
Man starts to actually crash out a bit. He becomes very frustrated.
I had it.
Stomps his foot, realizes how close he was, and gets angry about it, frustrated, annoyed. Balls his fist together like he's Arthur. Insults us and our damnable heroics. This is entirely an emotional response to what happened. And now Halmarud comes in, or who we assume to be Halmarud. I mean, it's like 99.99999% chance of it being Halmarud. She doesn't say a word here. She simply walks up to him, and he calms down now.
Detected the stench of failure already, have you? Such a keen sense of smell.
And Calyx says, I will give my report as is protocol. That is a very logical approach to what happened here. But it happened because of Halmarud.
Be sure our winter peers are apprised of the details.
Then he talks about the Winterers, and that's how the patch ends. Now let's jump ahead to patch 7.4's ending. Enter patch 7.4, and there's not too much that I want to actually talk about here, but there is this one quick little interaction between Halmarud and Calyx here. Basically, Halmarud is saying they're going to be leaving the 9th, and she's asking Calyx here, hey, if you wish to say your goodbyes, I could find you a vessel and mold it to match your preferred presentation. This one's a bit more nuanced because you could argue Halmarud's approaching this from a place of empathy. Oh, this is Calyx's world. He may want to say goodbye to people. I could go get him a vessel so that he could do that. You could also argue it's from a logical perspective as well, because it's like, okay, Calyx is gonna want to say goodbye. We could speed this process up. He can't say goodbye in the squirrel outfit. I could go get him a vessel. But what I think is particularly telling is not how Halmarud interacts with Calyx here. It's what Calyx follows up with.
Say your goodbyes. I could find you a vessel and mold it to match your preferred presentation.
Don't you dare.
He doesn't approach this from a place of pure logic. Don't you dare, I will not debase myself by occupying a living body ever again. That is not approaching this situation or responding to what Halmarud said from a logical perspective. This is inherently emotional, especially that first sentence, that declarative statement, don't you dare. He's not responding to Halmarud from a place of logic. It's not that occupying a living vessel is going to set them back in some way. He's approaching this from the perspective that it goes against his way of thought. It goes against essentially his morality. By itself, not that much. Again, it's an easily ignorable line, especially when we were first experiencing 7.4 when it came out. But now with the Logos, Pathos, Ethos stuff, we might be able to dig in a little bit more here. Let's fast forward to literally the next line of dialogue. And in any case, to travel the rift as you do requires the shedding of one's flesh, does it not? So to be fair to Calyx over here, that's a logical reaction to the situation. It's almost like Calyx doesn't fully commit one way or the other. But now look at Halmarud. I apologize if I upset you. Your understanding is, in essence, correct. Just to me, the way she's wording this, and maybe there's a localization thing, but the way that Halmarud speaks feels like she's approaching the situation more from a logical perspective, like Logos, rather than an empathetical perspective. Or maybe the better way to put that is Halmarud is trying to utilize empathy here. She's just not really good at it, even with someone like under her umbrella like Calyx. She's like, oh, maybe this will please Calyx. Oh no, it just kind of pissed him off. Then a little bit later on, Calyx utilizes a very logical argument. Well, to traverse the rift, you kind of need to be in a small body because only small amounts of matter can be taken through the fissures. So him being in the squirrel outfit is advantageous for what they're trying to do. So we're circling back to what I was talking about earlier, where Calyx is almost like 50-50 when it comes to approaching things from a logical perspective or from an emotional perspective. He's not fully committed one way or the other, despite the fact that sometimes he really tries to appear as if he is. Then this bit is particularly interesting. Halmarut says, this world is doomed to die. If you have anyone you want to say goodbye to, now's the time to give those fond farewells. But then Calyx says, I had hoped to banish death from their lives. Why should it come to all, whether they will it or no? Why must any accept this burden and grief, emotions? In his own way, he's approaching this from an empathetic point of view. He doesn't want the others to experience that burden and grief. It was never about any one person, so no, there are none with whom I would exchange fond farewells. Besides the Warrior of Light in 7.5, we'll get to that. But then he says something that I think will be quite telling for the future of his character. But so long as mankind yet survives, I can hold fast to my faith. It is a very common theme to have logic and science versus faith. Clearly, they want to portray Calyx as this logical being. For large swaths of 7.2 and 7.3, he gives off that vibe. He's the cold, calculating scientist. But the more we interact with him, the more we see of him, the more this stuff slips through the cracks. Almost like Calyx in the squirrel outfit through the fissures. Right here, he's talking about the fact he has faith in something, an ideal, if you will. He's not approaching this situation from a logical perspective. And I think when it comes to stuff like this, and particularly the characters of the Winterers, I think intention is going to be very telling, possibly even more so than the result of whatever actions they take. Calyx is clearly not approaching this from purely a logical perspective. He gives off the air of the cold, calculating scientist type, but that's not really what's going on here, or at least it's not the full truth. It's almost as if he's trying to use that logos, the logic, to masquerade this torrent of emotions beneath the surface. That my life's work might again bring someone salvation. This line could honestly go either way, logos or like emotions. It could go either way, I could argue. And then Halmarut drops the hammer. Hold fast you must as we press ever onward. For soon it begins and every world shall tremble. The Winterers must be prepared to outlast the great withering to come. That's your ominous prediction, is it? And again, pay attention to the wording that is chosen here. Calyx calls it an ominous prediction. It's something bad, something you don't want to happen. That's arguably an emotional way to phrase that. But then Halmarut, devoid of emotion by the way, says no, it's nature's proclamation, can't you hear it? Matter of factly. She's not saying how she feels when it comes to this entire situation. She's stating what she perceives to be a simple fact of the matter. No, nature's the one saying it. Can you not hear it? There's almost a detachment to this that I would argue isn't there with Calyx. It's almost as if, and I'm possibly reading a little bit too much into this, but I really don't think I am. It's almost as if Calyx is trying to emulate how Halmarut approaches a situation, how she acts. He's trying to be that cold, purely logical being in regards to the Great Withering and what will be eventually coined the solstice in patch 7.5, but his emotions slip through the cracks. Halmarut's really don't. But now let's move to patch 7.5. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to patch 7.5. We need to lock in here. So Halmarut pops up out of nowhere and immediately goes, greetings, and just reveals the fact that she's Halmarut of the Ascians. Again, very matter-of-factly, just puts it all out there. And just like with Calyx in patch 7.4, she once again tries to be empathetic to varying degrees of success. Yeah, we are your sworn foes, I know, but on this occasion will you not put away your arms? She's trying to be understanding that, hey, I just revealed the fact I'm an Ascian to people that really don't like Ascians. Let me try to at least say that I understand their position here. And then immediately hits Fancritter with like the vegan beam when he takes his gunblade out. Then Y'shtola says, I assume you are the one who bestowed Calyx with the knowledge of summoning and the reflections. I totally didn't just bit my lip there. And she says, yes, that is correct. Now, you could argue her body language right here exudes a sense of nervousness, which would be an emotional response to like being in front of the warrior of freaking light that she did run away from the moment we spotted her in patch 7.4. So just like with Calyx, how we talked about like the mask slipping from him on occasion, you could make the argument here that Halmarut is kind of a similar case. I would argue not to nearly the same degree degree as Calyx, and I wouldn't really be surprised if Halmarut is essentially playing a game here. She's trying to play on her emotions and get us to lower our guard, essentially. I don't fully trust her here. Then Calyx comes in and trying to disarm the situation because we're on high alert now, he approaches this from a logical perspective, to give him credit. Be at ease, even were I to occupy a combat-oriented vessel, I would not have the ability to defeat you. Then he tries to logically explain why he's not particularly dangerous to us right now. You destroyed my plan, my life's work. I have not to replace it, nor will I ever regain what I once had. He's trying to reason with us. You could argue this is Logos, and I think you would be correct here. And then Halmarut gives us a lecture in Shotology 101, as she is essentially lore-dropping this entire situation, trying to give us the facts, or at least what she perceives to be the facts, or at least the facts that she wants us to have at this juncture. All life and matter will be condensed into a single whole and remade for a new beginning, a complete rebirth. She looks a little bit melancholic here, but there's still something about Halmarut in terms of overall vibe that appears distant. Aetherius will return to the way it once was, hundreds of millions of years past, to a quiet and peaceful time long before the light of mankind was kindled. It is an inevitability that I have foreseen since time immemorial, a future that awaits should creation be freed from the influence of Hydaelyn and Zodiac. And then, funnily enough, with the way she explains how the whole solstice works and essentially the star, it's almost as if the star itself is approaching this from Logos. The star is tolerant to life, it holds no grudges and neither rages nor weeps for being sundered. The star itself is indifferent. It doesn't have emotions when it comes to this. It just does what it does. Nature runs its course and is just indifferent to life's survival. You're not going to empathetically appeal to the star itself. As she says, the wheels of creation are going to keep turning. I'm paraphrasing a little bit there. And look at the way that she's delivering this. An emotionless expression, but it will not, for nothing lies beyond the solstice. When all creation is reunited, when that day comes, every last trace of mankind shall be erased. It really does feel as if Halmarut herself is trying to approach this internally from a logical perspective. And here she's basically admiring mankind's ability that no matter the suffering, no matter the grief, no matter the strife, not cloud, he has forged ever onward. Strong even as he is weak, his is a proud tale in the history of the star. And while she's saying this, she's looking at the butterfly that you could argue maybe symbolizes here how she is viewing mankind. The butterfly is very bright and also colorful, while she's approaching this with her almost emotionless expression here. 'Twould be a shame for that tale to end, for all to wither and die, when some might yet survive. Would you not agree? She's trying to get us to be on her side here, so she's using wording and phrasing that is trying to appeal to what we value. But if you read between the lines, she's approaching this from a very utilitarian perspective. If we don't do anything, everyone's going to die, there won't be any life. That is logically the bad outcome that we want to avoid. Any alternative is preferable. And then Urianger connects the dots. Their goal is to actually do rejoinings, because while a lot of people may die from them, some may live and life will be able to go on. A tragedy, yes, but to Halmarut and to the Winterers, preferable to complete annihilation. And then Calyx basically confirms that what Urianger said was correct. Again, another check for Calyx in the Logos box here. The Winters we are called, and if you and yours seek to protect all life, then sooner or later you shall have to contend with us. A logical conclusion to what's going on here. And then Kryl approaches this from purely an emotional perspective, saying everything you've done, Calyx, is unforgivable. And now we start to get into the meat and potatoes here. I do not ask that you be pragmatic, nor do I seek your approval. She understands why we're responding like this. Given your familiarity with other reflections, 'tis only natural that you are averse to our methods. But a real follow-up here, logical. There's one irrefutable fact you must understand. Logos. Should we take no action at all, the solstice will come and no one will be left alive. No one. She is approaching this from purely a logical perspective here. And this is her real argument at the end of it all. And this to me is where Halmarut really starts to portray the Logos side of things. Of course, should it serve to satisfy your ambition, you are welcome to deal with the reflections as you deem fit. Zoom in on Halmarut's face. once again being largely emotionless, blank. Then she busts out the glorified glamour here, like the pariah and wanderer who satisfied his own when he brought the star to the brink of ruin to face you. She's basically trying to dismantle the pathos argument we would have, where it's like our natural instinct to this would be to try to save as many people as we can. She's approaching this from a logos perspective. Saving anyone is better than losing everyone. Meanwhile, she understands we're sympathetic to the other shards. But we still have one more scene for patch 7.5, at least for now. Now let's get to the final cutscene of patch 7.5 part 1, and arguably the scene where Calyx best exemplifies Logos. But is it that simple? Well, let's take a look. So we begin with the Warrior of Light doing our best Xenos impression, as we do, and then the first line of dialogue from Calyx, again, exemplifies Logos. I detest evenings such as this, too bright, too stimulating, the mind distracted by the inconsequential. I've mentioned this before, I really do think one of the core elements for Calyx's character going forward will be essentially this war between Logos and Pathos for him. He wants to be Logos. He wants to apply reason and logic to every situation. He is the scientist after all. Like, in his regular form, he is the nerdy boy in the lab coat. Like, that's who he wants to be, but every now and then that pathos slips out. He becomes overly emotional. And sure, you could view this as a bit of a throwaway line, but I think it's a little example of the overall internal battle going on with Calyx here. I detest evenings such as this, too bright, too stimulating, the mind distracted by the inconsequential. If he only applied logic and reasoning to everything, he wouldn't mind evenings such as this because his mind wouldn't be distracted. And let's read way too deep into this entire cutscene. Calyx comes to us and we see the squirrel outfit. And what he says, "You needn't be so wary, I merely come to offer information before my departure." Which, by the way, as people have pointed out since this patch, he doesn't have to do this. And I can only think of a couple of reasons why he would actually come to us by himself and essentially dump a summary of FanFest to us. Either he is wildly overconfident and just wants to tell us what he's going to do because he doesn't think we can stop him, and he wants to kind of rub our faces in it because we stopped his big plan in 7.3. I don't think that's it though. I think the far more likely outcome of all of this is that he wants us to interfere and he's trying to weave us into whatever grand scheme he's concocting, and he's giving us just the right information at just the right time so that we can act according to how he expects us to react. It feels like he's weaving a plan, baiting a trap, and we're going to fall for it. And I did say that's probably the more likely outcome here, and you could argue that's more aligned with Logos instead of Pathos. Then, like I said, he basically gives us a summary of FanFest here, talking about the 4th, a world locked in ice, lands are blanketed in thick clouds like Xenoblade 2. In order to survive, man has fled to the skies using great magics to establish new civilizations. Let's move on from here. Now, this choice I find interesting on our part. We get 2 dialogue options here. That sounds exciting, or why tell me where you're going? Well, when you think about it, it's a Pathos Logos option here. That sounds exciting is inherently emotional. We are excited for the things he's telling us. The possibility of going to the 4th and discovering these cool civilizations that have taken to the sky in a world overrun by ice. That sounds exciting. It's an emotional response more aligned with Pathos. Why tell me where you're going? We're getting into his reasoning. We're trying to figure out why Calyx would tell us this information that aligns more with Logos. And since our main thingamabob is called Ethos, I mean, kind of not subtle there, Square Enix, not gonna lie to you. I wouldn't be surprised if not only in 7.5 part 2, but in also 8.0 and moving forward, if we got a lot more dialogue options, kind of like this one, where it's essentially us either responding to a situation with logic and reasoning or with emotions. It sounds like a basic dialogue option, sure, but if the rhetorical triangle is going to be a main theme of the story moving forward, I think that's an interesting device in order just to drive that all home. Then if you reply with, "That sounds exciting," he basically says, "It's not my intent to excite. I have my own designs I would see realized, nothing more." He's clearly holding back here. And as a sidebar, this isn't really like Logos or Pathos. I guess you could could boil it down to that if you really want to get nitpicky. Believe me or don't as you like. For all I know, you lack the means to follow us anyway. This just really feels like he's just lying to us here. That, or he's banking on us finding some kind of solution to the problem of we're not able to get there. So maybe he could like potentially copy it, or he does want us to follow him. He just doesn't want us to think that he wants us to follow him. I think the latter one is more likely personally. Now we get into the meat and potatoes and what I believe is going to be the main story for the Warrior of Light moving forward with the Godless Realm saga. Calyx basically says, Halmaru mentioned earlier, she suggested that dealing with the reflections might satisfy your ambition, but is that truly so? We are technically seeing Halmaru and Calyx kind of break away from each other here. You have seen battles beyond counting, have defeated even the fear of death. Is there some conclusion that you seek no matter the cost? Getting the heart of the matter center stage here. What is it the Warrior of Light wants to do? Why do we do the things that we do? Do we have some kind of end goal? Now, I think there's a couple of ways they can write this going forward. Either they wrap this back around to like Azam and his motivations, or they won't overly address this too much and kind of leave this overall theme here so that we can fill in the blanks for our own Warrior of Light. I kind of feel that's what they're going to do, though I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they do both, because I do believe this is going to be an Azam-centric story moving forward. I don't really think the Warrior of Light specifically is going to have some kind of grander goal beyond basically just wanting to be an adventurer, being the hero when we are called upon. We're going to try to find some kind of way to stop the solstice, or we're going to try to find some kind of way to save the people. If they do find some way to really expand on this, could be a really interesting direction. I will share with you a truth. Then here Calyx is basically saying, look, the Winterers don't necessarily agree with each other. They may cooperate, but they don't necessarily have the same beliefs or even the same end goals. And then Calyx says it plain here. I find those of my fellows objectionable. Talking about the actions here. I think that gives us a bit of an indication as to the story direction for possible Winterers going forward, because Calyx was so of the opinion that the preservation of people's memories is so important. That indicates there's going to be a Winterer or potentially others that don't share that same principle. And then we have this scene where we essentially peer beyond the veil. Calyx is no longer in the school outfit and we see him for himself in the science outfit, in the lab coat, the best personification of his logos, of his appeal to reason and just overall knowledge. No matter how we are reviled, no matter what we must steal, our actions will be vindicated by those who abide in the future we create. Arguably, the most logical thing he said in regard to the triangle. He understands that other people are going to be upset, they may disagree, they may even revile him, but he believes this is the most logical course of action, and that the end result will be more important and will be revealed to also be more important than how people feel in the moment. And he basically decries our pathos. Our emotional response to situations like this is to save everybody, to be that hero. But by doing so, we're going to get to the solstice, everybody's going to die. What good are our ambitions in a world where we just continually fail? And not just continually. What Calyx is saying here, we're going to get to a point where our emotional response to these situations is going to lead to the total death of humanity. What value will our heroism hold at that endpoint? Your noble deeds will amount to nothing more than folly, for no living soul shall remain to judge them. This is going to be the big struggle the Warrior of Light has going forward. I don't think it's just going to be an 8.0. We're going to want to try to save everybody because that is who we are, that is our nature. Will we end up being the bad guy because of that? We'll have good intentions, but it's the same old saying, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. I don't think the end goal that we will come to will just be to pair up with the Winterers and, oh, they were right the entire time. We're going to find some unique solution to this problem, almost certainly, but what form will that solution take? And he tells us this, and we are shown him in his lab coat, in his regular form, the form that best personifies logos here. Now, we went through a lot today, and I can easily understand why some people would go, Jmulls, I think we went a bit too deep here. Maybe we should rein it back. I think one of the fun elements of analyzing a story is seeing the sources of inspiration and how they shape the overall narrative. One of the big things I love to do on this channel is break down Xeno. For those who don't know, Xeno is my favorite series of all time. Xenogears, Xenosaga, and also Xenoblade. And kind of like what I expect out of the Godless Realm saga, Xeno also takes a lot of inspiration from these philosophical works, most notably for Xenosaga when it comes to Nietzsche stuff. I mean, even the subtitles for these games are just works from Nietzsche, also Sprache Zarathustra, Will to Power, Beyond Good and Evil. And when it comes to Xenosaga, when it comes to Xenogears, you can play these games with a surface level understanding of what's going on here, and just look at it from plot points, characters, world building, and all that, and have a really good and engaging narrative. But when you understand where these writers are getting a lot of their inspiration from, you can find out how they weave that into the actual narrative, and I think it adds something. And to me, it makes me appreciate these games all the more, and it gives a feeling of intentionality for like even dialogue that I would ordinarily just disregard as kind of filler or just there to be there, and gives it a whole new perspective and meaning. And I really find that stuff interesting and fun. And while I'm not sure that the Godless Realm saga is going to have that same level of detail, I think a lot of these moments just feel way more impactful or meaningful, just far more engaging when you look at it through this lens of them using the rhetorical triangle, looking at it through Aristotle. Is it necessarily a requirement to understand everything? No, but I do think it gives additional perspective. And when it comes to the future of Final Fantasy XIV, a lot of things are up in the air, but I'm kind of certain about a couple of details. I think they are going to play with this triangle, unless this was just a whole like localization thing, which I kind of doubt, but still, I think they are going to play on this rhetorical triangle, pathos, logos, ethos. And I also don't think we're supposed to know which character represents which idea entirely as of right now. And I imagine some characters are going to be struggling with one idea versus the other. I think that specifically, the idea of battling between what you feel is ethically correct and also what logically makes sense in this situation, essentially the trolley problem, that's going to be a major theme going forward here. They weren't really subtle about it in 7.5, and I imagine that's only going to be taken up to 11 when we get to Evercold, have to deal with a world that's being overtaken by ice and snow. When it comes to the story going forward, I mean, come on, they gave us a doodad called Ethos. That's kind of clear, right? I think what they're going to want us to do is choose between pathos and logos. What do I mean by this? When it comes to Evercold, and almost certainly the expansion afterwards as well, we're going to have to look at each situation and the people involved and say, do we apply cold logic to what's going on here to try to avert the solstice, or do we try to find some idealistic notion that will be able to save everyone and everything? Does that solution actually exist? Do the Winterers have a point? Because I think it's fair to say that the Winterers overall, or at least Calyx and Halmarut right now, are arguably closer to Logos, where they are trying to apply cold logic to what's going on here. They are willing to sacrifice a bunch of people if it means that life is able to be preserved after the solstice happens. It's not a case of them being 100% Logos, it's just they are more aligned with that than they are Pathos, but it creeps up into them every now and then, like Calyx, for instance. Primarily Calyx, actually, how over the course of this video, we've gone over those scenes where he becomes a little bit more emotional than you think he would be if he's trying to only represent Logos. Now, it's entirely possible that Calyx at some point betrays Halmarut and the Winterers for whatever reason. They have dropped those seeds throughout his story so far, but that will remain to be seen. I think what they're going to try to set us up to do is look at everything that is to come between now and the solstice, and we're going to have to choose between Logos and Pathos, between the cold logic of just being able to save some people is better than everyone dying, versus no matter what we do, we should try to find a way to save potentially everybody. Now, almost certainly the solution here is going to be somewhere in the middle, where we end up trying to just save as many people as we reasonably can. I still really wouldn't be surprised if our solution to the problem ends up being, okay, let's actually do some rejoinings, but we do them like we did with the 9th, where we can take a piece of that shard and essentially control X, control V it onto the source. We all know they love setting up plot strings that are followed up way down the line. I also wouldn't be surprised if the way we're able to rejoin a shard in order to prevent the solstice overall isn't just, let's have another calamity, poggers. Maybe we just find some way to be able to siphon more ether from one shard and bring it to the source. Kind of like what we're doing between the 1st and the 13th right now, just on a grander scale. I think in that way, that's like, to me, the solution that feels like the one they would come up with, where we're able to save the people themselves, but we lose the physical location of that shard, their home, quote unquote, but they can can still like bring the most important stuff to the source. It also kind of works off what they've been kind of doing with some zones over the last couple of expansions, like Ultima Thule and Living Memory, where the zone itself changes over the course of the narrative. Now, I'm not entirely sold on that being what they're going to do. I mean, we're still like basically near the beginning of this entire tale, right? But what I really am convinced on is that the theme is going to be us choosing between cold logic versus our most extreme empathetic reaction to what's going on and our desire to save everybody. Are we willing for there to be compromise? Are we willing for there to be sacrifices potentially along the way? What form and shape will those sacrifices take? That's what I'm really convinced on. That was also kind of Calyx's story as well, and preservation overall. They were willing to sacrifice what we deem to be alive to preserve people as the endless, because Calyx and preservation applied cold logic to the situation, and they viewed that to be preferable to just everyone dying. It wasn't ideal, but it was acceptable, or at least preferable to the situation that was to come. I wouldn't be surprised if that's a very similar thing that happens with the one-eyed guy in Evercold, or whoever the Winterer, probably the one-eyed guy, ends up being for the fourth. If they had to make some kind of sacrifice that we deem to be unacceptable for what they deem to be the greater good, or at least a better situation that they would rather be stuck with rather than just complete annihilation. I'm also convinced in the idea that they just can't write the solution that we come up with, being that we're able to save everybody with no sacrifices whatsoever. If that ends up being the case, again, no indication actually going to do that. It's just that to me would be the worst case scenario wise in terms of the overall writing. You can't just have our solution be, actually the Winters were wrong about all of this. There was something we could do to save everybody and avert like any sacrifices having to be made. I don't see them doing that because I feel as if that would just kind of undermine the entire emotional struggle that's going on here with this rhetorical triangle. I think it would also just kind of feel like a cop-out, and I don't think they're going to go that route. I think the biggest question going forward is just what middle ground are we able to find in the end? What will be our solution? Because almost certainly this is going to end with us fighting somebody and a child, right? Like that's not up for debate. But what sacrifices, what compromises are we willing to make? And also what is it that we deem to be essentially the best possible outcome we can realistically get? I think that's going to be a very interesting story to follow. So here's where you come in. Leave a comment down below with where do you think the story is going to go from here for the Godless Realm saga? What do you think is going to happen? Or at least what is your best guess? I want your best theories, people, and I may react to them in a future video. And while you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. But speaking of theories, you guys have some absolutely crazy ones, and I love them. And some of you may be on the money when it comes to Evercold. Want to find out more? You should check out this video right here. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.